Hank Miller's words, "I want a divorce," hung in the air. A low, guttural pronouncement that seemed to absorb all the sound from their kitchen. Molly Davis stood frozen by the refrigerator, a carton of milk still in her hand, the sudden chill of his voice making her bones ache. He turned, the heavy thud of the bedroom door slamming echoing through the quiet house, leaving her utterly exposed. The quiet silence a testament to 15 years now shattered. Molly didn't move. The milk carton, cold and heavy, remained clutched in her hand, growing slick with condensation. The kitchen was still. The gentle hum of the refrigerator, the only sound now. A stark contrast to the sharp crack of Hank's voice. Then the door. Caleb and Sarah were at school, a small mercy that kept her from needing to compose her face, to pretend that the world wasn't suddenly leaning sideways. Her eyes fixed on the ceramic tile floor, the faint pattern blurring, her mind a blank slate where a moment ago there had been a lifetime. Then a thought, small and insidious, began to unspool. It wasn't the last fight, not the bills, not the argument about the leaky faucet. It was the joke. The silly joke, she'd called it. The one about Dale Peterson, Hank's boss. Being easy on the eyes. How could something so trivial have led to this? Just 6 months ago, their life in suburban Chicago had seemed to hum with a quiet, predictable rhythm. Molly's bakery, Sweet Surrender, had found its stride, supplying specialty cakes to coffee shops and local events. Hank's marketing career at a major tech firm was on an upward trajectory. His recent promotion heralded with a modest celebration dinner at their favorite Italian place. Their 2 kids, Caleb, 11, and Sarah, 8, were healthy, spirited, and mostly well-behaved. Molly often thought they had built something truly good, something solid and enduring. She remembered one afternoon, a Sunday, not long after Hank's promotion. Molly was in the kitchen, elbow-deep in flour, mixing dough for an experimental cranberry-orange scone. The radio played softly, a classic rock station. Hank had walked in, fresh from a run, his face flushed, smelling of fresh air and sweat. He'd leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "What concoction is this today, baker woman?" he'd asked, a smile tugging at his lips. Molly had glanced over her shoulder, flour dusting her cheek, the fine white powder catching in her eyelashes. "Secret project. You'll have to wait." He'd pushed off the frame, moving behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. He kissed the flour from her cheek. "You smell like vanilla and happiness," he'd murmured into her hair. Before she could respond, he dipped his fingers into the bowl, flicking a small cloud of flour onto her nose. "Hey," she'd laughed, retaliating with a powdery pat on his jaw. Soon, the kitchen had become a battlefield of light-hearted chaos. Clouds of flour puffing into the air, their laughter echoing off the white cabinets. It had been a moment, pure and unburdened, a physical manifestation of how perfectly in sync they had felt. Their lives, then, were like that dance, intricate and intuitive, each step knowing the other. But the subtle shifts had begun soon after. Missed dinners turned into canceled date nights. Hank's hours grew longer, his calls home less frequent. He started bringing work home, retreating to his den with his laptop late into the evenings. Molly, busy with her own expanding business, attributed it to the demands of his new position. "It's a big step up, honey," she'd told him one night, rubbing his tired shoulders. "You'll adjust," he'd just grunted, eyes fixed on the screen. Then came that night, about 6 months ago. They were at a work dinner for Hank's company, a charity gala at a downtown hotel. Molly had been making polite conversation with some of Hank's colleagues. Dale Peterson, the head of Hank's department, a man known for his sharp suits and even sharper wit, had just left their table. Molly had watched him go, a casual observation on her tongue. "He cleans up nice, doesn't he?" she'd said to Hank, leaning closer, a little buzz from the champagne. Easy on the eyes for a boss. Hank's hand, which had been reaching for his water glass, froze mid-air. His jaw, she noticed, clenched almost imperceptibly. He looked at her, his expression flat, unreadable. His eyes were dark, unblinking. "I hadn't noticed," he'd said, his voice curt, a cold edge to it that cut through the pleasant warmth of the evening. Molly had felt a flash of annoyance. Her pride, a stubborn thing, prevented any attempt at an apology. It was a joke. A harmless, passing remark. She figured he'd get over it. That his male ego had just been briefly bruised. Men. She just shrugged and turned her attention back to her untouched dessert. He didn't get over it. The next morning, he left for work without his usual kiss. A hurried goodbye muttered from the garage. He started retreating to his home office almost immediately after dinner, sometimes before the kids had even finished their homework. He became distant. His conversations clipped, his presence in their shared spaces diminishing until he felt like a ghost in his own house. Weeks passed, turning into months. Family dinners became an exercise in uncomfortable silences, punctuated only by Caleb and Sarah's chatter, which Molly tried desperately to keep animated. She'd catch Hank's gaze sometimes, a brief flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher before he'd look away. Lying awake at night, the empty space beside her growing larger with each passing week, Molly was consumed by a nagging, persistent feeling. It was more than the joke, she knew. It had to be, but what it was, she couldn't grasp. The thought was a burr under her skin, chafing, constant. He just said it, Brenda, Molly said, stirring her latte, the spoon clinking softly against the ceramic. The foam swirled, obscuring the dark coffee beneath. Just like that. I want a divorce. Her voice was flat, almost clinical. As if she were relaying a weather report. They were in their usual corner booth at the daily grind, the smell of roasted beans and sugar, a familiar comfort that now felt alien. It's like Hank's a different person. Brenda Hayes sat opposite Molly, her own coffee untouched, her brow furrowed. She had been Molly's friend since kindergarten, through bad haircuts and worse boyfriends, through weddings and births. She knew Molly better than almost anyone. Brenda repeated, her voice low. No warning? No argument? Molly shook her head, watching the milk froth dissolve into the dark liquid. Just, I want a divorce. After Caleb and Sarah left for school. Like he was reading off a grocery list. She gripped the warm mug, her knuckles white. He's been so distant, Brenda. For months. Ever since that company dinner. When I made that stupid joke about Dale Peterson, Brenda leaned forward, her gaze direct, unwavering. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Molly, honey, I hate to ask this, but do you think there could be someone else? The question, spoken aloud, hit Molly with the force of a physical blow. It was a thought she had pushed down, buried under layers of excuses, stress, work, the vague unease of a relationship shifting, but hearing it from Brenda, seeing the concern in her friend's eyes, made it real, terrifyingly solid. Molly felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, spreading through her chest. Her breath hitched. God, Brenda, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the cafe's gentle murmur. What if there is? The possibility, once a shadow, now loomed, casting everything she knew into stark relief. Brenda reached across the small table, covering Molly's hand with her own. Her touch was firm, reassuring. Look, I don't know, and you don't either, but you need to find out, for your own peace of mind. Molly, you can't just sit here wondering, letting it eat you alive. Be smart about it. Don't confront him until you know something concrete. But do some digging. Molly nodded slowly, the advice settling heavy in her thoughts. Brenda was right. The not knowing was a worse torment than almost any truth. She needed to know. She needed to see. To find proof, one way or another. Leaving the daily grind, the city streets felt sharper, the faces of strangers more defined. The soft spring air, which had felt pleasant just an hour ago, now seemed to carry an edge of impending storm. A nascent plan, unwelcome and ugly, began to take shape in her mind, coiling around the knot in her stomach. 2 days later, the opportunity presented itself. Hank called around 4 in the afternoon, his voice detached, almost clipped. I'll be home late tonight, Molly. Got a big project. A lot of late meetings. Okay, she'd managed, trying to keep her own voice even, betraying none of the sudden tremor that had started in her hands. Don't work too hard. After school, she dropped Caleb and Sarah at her mother's house. Just a quick errand. Mom, she'd explained, feigning a lightness she didn't feel. Be back before dinner. Her mother, accustomed to Molly's unpredictable schedule with the bakery, hadn't asked questions. Molly's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs as she drove towards downtown, towards Hank's office building. The skyscraper, a shimmering monolith of glass and steel, rose against the late afternoon sky, indifferent to the turmoil in her gut. She found a parking spot across the street, a block down, discreetly tucked between a faded sedan and a delivery van. From here, she had a clear view of the main entrance. She cut the engine. The sudden silence in the car, amplifying the thud of her own pulse. She settled in, watching, the hours stretching out. Each minute, a slow, agonizing tick. The streetlights flickered on. People streamed out of the building, a steady flow of hurried figures melting into the evening rush. Each time a tall man in a suit appeared, Molly's breath would catch, only to be released in a shaky exhale when it wasn't him. Just after 7, Hank emerged. He was alone. Molly felt a wave of profound relief wash over her, so potent it made her lightheaded. Her suspicions, her plan, her agonizing weight. It had all been for nothing. A shameful blush crept up her neck. She had truly become the jealous, paranoid wife. He was just working late, like he said. But then, just as Hank reached the edge of the plaza, Dale Peterson, his boss, also exited the building. Dale, tall and athletically built, moved with a confident stride. He caught up to Hank, a broad smile on his face, and clapped him firmly on the shoulder. Hank turned, his own expression softening into something Molly hadn't seen in months. Genuine, animated. The two men stood for a moment, talking, gesticulating, both of them laughing at something. Molly watched, a cold dread seeping back into her bones. They weren't just talking. They were getting into Dale's sleek silver sports car, a low-slung, expensive model she recognized from the company dinner. Dale opened the passenger door for Hank. Hank ducked in. Dale walked around, slid into the driver's seat, and the car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into traffic. Molly's mind reeled. Where were they going? Why had Hank said nothing about Dale? Why were they leaving together in his boss's car when Hank drove his own car to work? The cold knot in her stomach twisted tighter, a churning mass of fear and confusion. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and dark suburban trees. Molly's thoughts a jumbled mess of half-formed questions. Confusion, a thick fog, had settled over her, overriding the sharp sting of anger she expected to feel. She had spent hours watching, waiting. For what? For proof of infidelity? Instead, she had seen Hank with his boss, Dale. 2 men. That was all. Yet, the image of them getting into Dale's car, Hank's genuine laughter, stuck in her mind like a burr. She parked her own car in the garage, the engine clicking as it cooled. The house was dark and silent. She moved through the living room, down the hall, and into their bedroom. Careful not to turn on any lights, she slipped under the covers, lying stiffly on her side of the bed, facing away from Hank's empty pillow. Her eyes remained open in the darkness. It was well past midnight when she heard the garage door rumble open. The faint hum of the engine, then the click of the lock, the soft pad of his footsteps in the hall. Sounds that had once been familiar, comforting, now felt alien. Scrutinized, she heard him enter the room, heard the soft rustle of his clothes as he changed, the click of the bedside lamp as he turned it on briefly, then off. He slipped into bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. He didn't touch her. He didn't say anything. Molly kept her breathing slow and even, feigning sleep, afraid of what she might say, afraid of what she might hear. The questions swirling in her mind felt too large, too dangerous, to unleash in the dark. The fear of the answers held her back. The next few weeks became a blur of tension. Unspoken words hung in the air between them like a perpetual mist. Hank was still distant, still working late. Molly found herself increasingly paranoid. Every text Hank received, every hushed phone call, every unexplained absence, feeding her growing suspicion. She felt a constant hum of unease, a knot in her stomach that never fully loosened. Then came another company event, a fundraiser for a local art museum. Hank had begged off, claiming a last-minute report, but urged Molly to go, represent the family. So Molly went, dressed in a black cocktail dress she'd bought months ago and hardly worn, feeling awkward and out of place among the buzzing crowd. She stood by the bar, nursing a glass of white wine, watching the art and the conversations she wasn't a part of. Molly, right? Hank's wife. The deep voice, smooth and resonant, startled her. She turned, a small jump in her chest. Dale Peterson stood beside her, a polite smile on his handsome face. He was taller than she remembered, with strong features and intelligent, assessing eyes. She acknowledged, despite herself, that he was indeed easy on the eyes. "That's me," Molly said, managing a faint smile. "Dale, please," he said, gesturing with his glass. "Just Dale. I'm glad you could make it. Hank said he had to miss out on all the fun tonight." He offered a self-deprecating chuckle. "He's probably up to his eyeballs in spreadsheets. Thanks to me. I'm a real slave driver, I'm afraid." Molly found herself letting out a short, surprised laugh. The tension she hadn't realized she was holding loosened a fraction. "He does seem to be working a lot lately." Dale nodded, his expression softening with a hint of warmth. "He's one of the hardest workers I've ever had. Really dedicated. You should be proud." He said her name again. Molly. The way he lingered on the syllables, almost imperceptibly, made a strange feeling prickle along her skin. Was it just her paranoia, or was there something else in his gaze? Molly felt a sudden exhaustion. She wanted to be home, away from the bright lights and the polite small talk. "It's just been a long night," she admitted, trailing off. "I think I should probably head home." "You're not driving, are you?" Dale asked, his voice laced with concern. He gestured to her wineglass. "I saw you enjoying that Sauvignon Blanc. I'd be happy to give you a lift. I'm heading that way anyway." He named her suburb, which was indeed on his route. She knew. Molly's instincts screamed no. Every fiber of her being urged her to politely refuse, to call a taxi, anything, but get into a car with Hank's boss, the man who had been with Hank that other night. But another part of her, a raw, hungry curiosity about the man who now seemed to occupy so much of Hank's time, pushed back. What could it hurt? It would be a chance to observe, to gather more information. "That's very kind of you, Dale," she said, surprised by her own words. "I'd appreciate that." The ride home was, surprisingly, nice. Dale was charming, attentive. He didn't push or pry. He asked about her bakery, seemed genuinely interested in the details of her business, the challenges, the small triumphs. He listened actively, his eyes occasionally meeting hers in the rearview mirror. He complimented her passion. Her drive. It was a stark contrast to the distant, preoccupied Hank she had grown accustomed to. The conversation flowed easily. The hum of his expensive engine, a quiet backdrop. It was, she realized, the most attentive male attention she'd received in months. Dale's easy conversation was a stark contrast to the silence that had become the norm with Hank. Molly found herself drawn into it, the quiet hum of his sports car a backdrop to a discussion that felt surprisingly genuine. He was articulate, witty, and seemed genuinely engaged, a refreshing change from Hank's increasingly clipped responses and preoccupied air. As they drove, Dale made a casual comment about Hank's dedication. "He's been burning the midnight oil on this big project," he said, maneuvering the car smoothly through a yellow light. "Serious hours. I sometimes wonder if he ever sleeps." Molly seized the opening, her voice carefully neutral. "Oh, really? I figured he was just, doing his usual. He hasn't mentioned anything specific." She tried to sound nonchalant, but her pulse quickened. Is it something new? Or a continuation of that big marketing campaign from a few months back?" Dale chuckled. "A bit of both, actually. It's a new client, a massive account, but it ties into some of the strategies we developed for the previous campaign. Hank's really taken the lead on it. He's good. Damn good." He glanced at her, a knowing smile. "He keeps his cards close to his chest." "Your husband." "Always has." Molly nodded, a tight, forced smile on her face. "Keeps his cards close to his chest." That was one way to put it. Another was distant and secretive. The conversation veered away from work, and soon they were pulling up to her house. The porch light was off. Hank still wasn't home. Dale cut the engine. The sudden silence was thick. "Well, here we are," he said, turning to her. His eyes, in the dim light of the street lamp, were dark and held a curious intensity. "Thanks for the company, Molly." It was enlightening. "Thank you for the ride, Dale," she replied, her voice a little breathy. Their goodbyes lingered, a beat too long, their gazes holding for a moment before she finally broke contact, opening the door. Walking up her dark driveway, Molly felt a confusing mix of guilt and relief. Guilt for getting into his car, for enjoying his company, for the strange flicker of attraction she couldn't deny. Relief that he was charming, attentive, and seemingly innocuous. But the attraction, small as it was, coiled in her stomach, making her question her own morality. She was stepping onto dangerous ground, and she knew it. She found herself in the quiet house alone. Hank was still not home. She couldn't bring herself to confess the ride with Dale. Not yet. The distance between her and Hank, already a wide chasm, grew even wider, filled with unspoken anxieties and a new, secret interaction. In the days that followed, Molly started receiving texts from Dale. Initially, they were work-related, following up on a vague discussion they'd had about her bakery, possibly catering some of his company's smaller events. Then, they became more personal. A link to an article about artisan bread, a casual question about her day, a quick joke. She found herself checking her phone more often. A small, guilty thrill each time his name popped up. Then came a real opportunity. Dale connected her with a prominent event planner he knew, a contact that led directly to a significant catering contract for Sweet Surrender. It was the biggest client she'd landed to date. A clear professional win. Molly convinced herself that her interactions with Dale were purely professional, a savvy businesswoman leveraging a useful connection. But the thrill she felt, the flutter in her chest when his name appeared on her screen, was more than just professional satisfaction. Hank, when he was home, noticed a subtle change in Molly. She was less withdrawn, her mood lighter, a renewed energy about her. She hummed while baking, her stride was more confident, but he didn't ask why. He simply observed, occasionally offering a faint, almost imperceptible nod. It was as if he recognized her improvement, approved of it even, but had no interest in its source. Molly, in turn, began to dress more carefully. She chose clothes that made her feel confident, put together. She spent a little more time on her hair, her makeup. Not for Hank, she told herself, but for herself. For the bakery. For the public-facing Molly. But deep down, she knew there was another reason. She rationalized her growing interactions with Dale as a way to understand Hank's world, to get closer to the truth of his distance. If she understood his work, his boss, perhaps she could understand him. It was a twisted logic, she knew, but it was all she had. The coffee shop was bustling, the scent of espresso heavy in the air. Molly sat across from Dale, ostensibly discussing the logistics for the new client. But the line between professional and personal was already blurring. She found herself enjoying his company, the easy flow of conversation, the way he genuinely listened. It was a stark contrast to the quiet void that had become her home. The new client opportunity was real and significant. Molly and Dale met at a small, independent coffee shop near her bakery, poring over menus and discussing themes. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from canapés to childhood memories, from profit margins to past relationships. Dale, over his espresso, spoke of a demanding ex-wife and the loneliness that sometimes accompanied his successful but consuming career. He spoke with a quiet vulnerability that disarmed her. Molly found herself responding in kind, a confession bubbling up that she hadn't intended to voice. It's been hard at home," she admitted, stirring her untouched tea. "Hank's just so distant. It feels like I'm living with a ghost sometimes. He used to be so present, so engaged. Now, it's just quiet and lonely." The words, once spoken, felt like a release. A heavy weight lifting. Dale listened, his gaze steady and sympathetic. He didn't offer advice or platitudes, just an attentive quiet that Molly craved. When she finished, he reached across the table, his fingers gently brushing the back of her hand, a small, brief touch that sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I'm sorry, Molly," he said, his voice soft, sincere. "That sounds incredibly tough. You deserve to be seen, to be heard." In that moment, a dangerous emotional intimacy formed. Molly felt truly seen, understood in a way she hadn't felt by Hank in months, maybe years. It was exhilarating, and deeply unsettling. She returned home later, the exhilaration warring with a heavy blanket of guilt. What was she doing? She had just confided in her husband's boss, a man she was, by her own admission, dangerously attracted to, and she had enjoyed it, every minute of it. That evening, the silence felt heavier than usual. The kids were tucked in, the house quiet. Molly couldn't stand it anymore. She found Hank in the living room, staring blankly at the television, which played a low hum of indistinct noise. "Hank," she started, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to keep it steady. "We need to talk." "What is going on?" "With us?" He didn't turn his head. "What's there to talk about, Molly?" "It's all the same, isn't it?" His tone was flat, dismissive. That broke something in her. "No, it's not the same. You're distant. You barely look at me. You just said you wanted a divorce a few weeks ago. And now you act like nothing happened." Her voice rose, edged with a desperation she usually kept hidden. Hank finally snapped. He spun around, his eyes blazing, his face tight with anger. "You want to know what's going on, Molly? It's you. Always judging. Always complaining. You never understand the pressure I'm under. The demands of my job." He stood up, towering over her. "And then that comment about Dale? Easy on the eyes, you said. You think I didn't hear that? You think that didn't stick with me?" His voice was low, furious. "My own wife, admiring my boss, calling him hot. It was a joke, Hank," she retorted, though the memory of Dale's handsome face, his sympathetic touch, flashed through her mind, making her cringe inwardly. "A stupid, thoughtless joke. Maybe. But a joke, you think so?" Hank's eyes were cold, piercing. "You think I don't see how you look at him now, Molly? How you light up when he texts you? How you come home after a work meeting with him and suddenly you're full of energy, all smiles?" Molly was stunned. He had been observing her. All this time, while she thought he was oblivious, distant, he had been watching. The tables had turned with a sickening thud, her guilt intensified, a burning flush creeping up her neck. "What are you talking about?" She tried to bluff, but her voice wavered. "Don't play dumb," he sneered. "I'm not an idiot. You think I don't see the little dance you two are doing? The texts, the coffee meetings, the long conversations?" "I know." The argument escalated quickly, dredging up years of minor resentments, unspoken frustrations, tossed back and forth like verbal grenades. The air crackled with bitterness. "You think I liked hearing that from my wife?" Hank continued, his voice heavy with a pain that finally cut through her anger. "That my boss was easy on the eyes, after everything I've been trying to do for us, to provide? I felt like I wasn't enough, Molly. That you were looking for something better. It made me push harder, work longer, to prove I was good enough, that I could give you everything." He sat down heavily on the couch, running a hand through his hair, his earlier fury replaced by a weary resignation. "After that, after you said that, I just started seeing him everywhere. His picture on the company website, his name on every email, thinking about what you said. It felt like you were comparing me to him, and I just couldn't shake it." His confession hung in the air, heavy and raw. Molly stared at him, suddenly seeing his distance not as indifference, but as a wounded retreat. It's in these quiet, painful moments, when the truth unravels, that we truly begin to understand the real cost of our choices. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Hank's confession about his insecurity hung in the air, a heavy, unmoving presence. Molly stared at him, the weight of his words pressing down on her. The anger, sharp and immediate, began to recede, replaced by a cold, dawning realization. All this time, She had been so consumed by her own fears and assumptions, by her perception of his withdrawal, that she had completely missed the root of his struggle. All those late nights, Molly, Hank continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a weariness that twisted her gut. They weren't just working. They were strategy sessions. Dale and I have been putting in insane hours, planning a complete overhaul of the regional marketing structure. It's a huge undertaking, confidential until the official announcement. If it goes through, I'm up for a senior executive position, a massive promotion. I wanted to tell you, to surprise you, but I couldn't risk anything getting out. He pushed himself up and walked over to his briefcase, which still sat by the door from his workday. He unlatched it, pulled out a thick, binder-clipped stack of papers. He handed them to her. Here, this is part of it. Confidentiality agreement in bold on the first page. See? I wasn't just working late, Molly. I was trying to build something better for us, to give us more security. More everything. He gestured vaguely at the house. Their life. After what you said about Dale, I felt like I had to prove myself even more. To you. To me. Molly looked down at the documents, her eyes scanning the official letterhead, the detailed project plans. Her heart sank, a sickening, heavy thud. The depth of her misunderstanding, her own culpability, hit her like a physical blow. She had been so wrong. So utterly, tragically wrong. Her own suspicions, fueled by a perceived abandonment, had blinded her to his efforts, his quiet struggle. While I was trying to make us proud, Hank's voice cut through her daze, sharp and laced with a fresh wave of hurt. You were out chasing compliments from my boss. He stepped closer, his face etched with pain. I saw you, Molly, that night after the art gala. I saw you and Dale leave. I saw you get into his car. Molly flinched, a gasp catching in her throat. Her face burned. All her carefully constructed rationalizations, her self-deception, crumbled around her. Hank, it wasn't what you think. She tried to explain, but her words felt weak, thin, full of half-truths. He just offered me a ride. I had a glass of wine. I didn't want to drive. I saw you, Molly, he repeated, cutting her off, his voice flat and hard. The raw pain in his eyes was unbearable, unblinking. You got in. You stayed in his car for a long time. What was that? If not a betrayal, the truth, stark and brutal, settled over her. Her emotional affair, however innocent she had tried to frame it, however much she had convinced herself it was merely professional networking or getting information, was real. It had happened. The casual touches, the whispered confessions, the shared vulnerabilities, the undeniable flicker of attraction. It was all real, and Hank had seen it. I can't trust you, Molly, Hank said, his voice devoid of warmth, devoid of any feeling she recognized. How can I? When I was trying to earn us a better life, you were doing that. He gestured vaguely, encompassing all of it. The texts, the coffee, the ride, the secret smiles. The respect, Molly. It's gone. The foundation. He looked around the room, as if seeing the crumbling walls of their marriage manifested physically. It's all crumbling. Molly, defeated, finally let her own confession spill out, stripped of any pretense. I was lonely, Hank, she whispered, her voice cracking. So lonely. You were never there. You never talked to me. And Dale, he listened. He made me feel seen, like I mattered. He filled a void. She looked up, her eyes pleading. I know it was wrong. I know. But I was so lost. Hank stared at her, his expression a mixture of defeat and profound sadness. He swallowed hard. So, it wasn't just my imagination then, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You really did like him. He didn't wait for her answer. He just turned, slowly, and walked out of the living room, leaving the divorce declaration, spoken weeks ago, hanging in the air with chilling, absolute finality. The only sound was the faint hum of the television, a cold, indifferent witness. Hank walked out, leaving Molly alone in the quiet living room. The weight of his final words, pressing down on her, the earlier fight, the anger, the blame, it all evaporated, replaced by a cold, searing wave of regret and shame. Her actions, her choices, crashed down on her with brutal force. She had misunderstood, she had sought comfort elsewhere, and now everything was broken. In the days that followed, the silence in the house grew heavier, suffocating. Caleb and Sarah, usually so boisterous, began to notice. "Mom, why isn't Dad eating dinner with us anymore?" Sarah asked one evening, her small voice laced with a worry that pierced Molly's heart. "Is Dad still mad about something?" Caleb chimed in, his brow furrowed, mirroring the tension in the room. Molly would offer vague, reassuring answers, but the questions always came, innocent yet sharp, reminding her of the ripple effect of her choices. Molly tried to salvage things, to talk to Hank, to apologize again, to explain the loneliness, the misunderstanding. But Hank was a wall, impenetrable and unyielding. His trust was shattered, replaced by a cold resentment that radiated from him even when he was silent. He started staying at a friend's place, ostensibly for space, leaving Molly alone in the house, facing the oppressive silence he left behind. She called Brenda, her voice hoarse, raw with unshed tears. "I messed up, Brenda," she confessed, the words tumbling out in a torrent. "I really messed up. Hank was working for us, for a promotion, and I got too close to Dale. I confided in him. I let myself feel something." Brenda listened, her usual pragmatic advice replaced by a stunned silence. "Molly," she finally said, her voice soft with disbelief. I don't know what to say. I thought he was seeing someone else." "Not you." The unspoken judgment in Brenda's tone was clear, even if gentle. Molly wept, the enormity of her pride, her misjudgment, her emotional carelessness, crashing down on her. The bakery, which had once been her solace and passion, began to suffer. Molly's focus dwindled. Orders were delayed, creativity waned. Her usual meticulous attention to detail gave way to a distracted, weary apathy. She lost a few small catering jobs, unable to bring herself to care. Then the formal letters started arriving. Divorce proceedings, cold, legal documents that reduced their 15 years of shared history to clauses and assets. Discussions about Caleb and Sarah's custody became painful battlegrounds. Each suggestion from Hank's lawyer, a fresh wound. He wanted primary custody, citing her emotional instability and questionable judgment, thinly veiled references to Dale. Molly fought back, but the fight felt hollow, her own hands stained by her actions. In a desperate moment, she tried to reach out to Dale. She sent a text. "Hi, Dale, it's Molly. How are things?" His reply was terse, distant. "Busy. Molly, hope you're well." She tried again. A phone call. He didn't answer, and a few minutes later, she received another text. "Molly, I think it's best if we don't communicate directly outside of work. Professional boundaries, you know." The message was polite, but unmistakably a dismissal. He was uncomfortable with the fallout, keen to distance himself. She realized then, with a bitter clarity, that Dale was just another man, not the empathetic savior she'd unconsciously painted him to be in her loneliness. He was a successful executive, shrewd and self-preserving, and she was merely an inconvenience in his professional landscape. To compound her misery, the big client opportunity she had secured through Dale's network mysteriously fell through. A brief, formal email informed her that they had decided to go in a different direction. Another consequence, another blow. The financial strain, added to her emotional distress, was almost unbearable. Molly felt utterly isolated. The perfect life in the suburbs she had meticulously built, the happy family, the successful business, now felt like a hollow shell, echoing with emptiness. She watched Caleb and Sarah, their vibrant energy muted, their smiles less frequent, their eyes clouded with unspoken questions. The true, devastating cost of their parents' choices, and especially her own, registered then, a raw, undeniable pain that settled deep in her bones. The mediation room was sterile, filled with the hushed tones of legalese and the tension of unspoken recriminations. Molly sat across from Hank, a neutral mediator between them, trying to navigate the choppy waters of co-parenting through a fog of bitterness. Every shared glance felt loaded, every quiet word a potential weapon. During one of the mediation sessions, a brief moment of quiet fell. Molly, summoning every ounce of courage, looked at Hank. "Hank," she began, her voice soft, raw. "I am so truly sorry. For everything. For my pride. For my assumptions. For letting myself blur lines. I was lonely, yes. But that's no excuse. I truly messed up. And I know I hurt you. I regret it more than you can imagine." She laid bare her vulnerability, acknowledging her full part in their breakdown. Hank listened, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer forgiveness, but his gaze, for the first time in months, was perhaps no longer purely accusatory, but tinged with a weary sadness. A long silence followed. Then, he spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "The promotion," he said, looking at the mediator, then at Molly. "It came through. But it came with a transfer. Out of state. West Coast office." The news hit Molly like a physical blow. A sudden, sharp panic seized her. Out of state. That meant Caleb and Sarah. Her children, a life without them close by. Without the daily rhythm of their laughter and complaints. Her breath hitched. The conversation immediately shifted, becoming even more tense, more painful, centered on the children's future. Who would stay? Who would move? What was truly best for Caleb and Sarah? Every suggestion felt like a battle over their very hearts. Molly looked at Hank, at the lines etched around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his hand as he held his water glass. She saw the pain she'd inflicted on him, mirroring her own, a shared devastation that cut deeper than any individual wound. It wasn't just her hurt anymore. It was theirs. She realized that paying the price for her choices wasn't just about financial loss or the end of a marriage. It was the unraveling of everything. Her family, her sense of self, her future, her identity as Hank's wife was gone. And the perfect mom image she'd curated was crumbling under the weight of her mistakes. She felt adrift, lost in a landscape of her own making. Molly finally started therapy, a hesitant step into uncharted territory. She sat across from a kind-faced woman named Dr. Evelyn Reed, grappling with her own deep-seated insecurities, the lifelong need for external validation she had never truly acknowledged. She talked about her childhood, her relationship with her parents, the quiet anxieties that had always gnawed at her, making her crave reassurance, even from Dale. The kids, meanwhile, kept asking, "Mom, why doesn't Dad live here anymore?" Sarah's voice was small, her eyes wide with confusion. Is he going to come back? Caleb, older, more reserved, would just look at her. A quiet question in his gaze that needed no words. Molly had to explain, in simple, age-appropriate terms, that sometimes adults make mistakes, that sometimes, even when they love each other, they can't live together anymore. Each explanation felt like twisting a knife in her own heart. One afternoon, Hank called about Caleb's school schedule. At the end of the call, he paused. "Oh," he said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "I just wanted to let you know. I've started seeing someone. Nothing serious, just casual dates." The words hit Molly with an unexpected sting. She knew they were getting divorced. She knew he would move on. But hearing it, the reality of it, was a sharp, cold jab to her gut. She felt a familiar knot of jealousy, quickly followed by self-reproach. What right did she have to feel anything? She was the one who had shattered their trust. The suburb, with its neat lawns and familiar faces, which had once symbolized their perfect, idyllic life, now felt stifling, claustrophobic. Every street, every park, every grocery store aisle held a memory, a phantom limb of what was lost. It was a constant, tangible reminder of her choices, and the painful, ongoing repercussion that was now her life. The finality of the divorce decree arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet click of the mail slot. A thick envelope, official and impersonal, sat on the doormat, sealing the end of 15 years. Molly opened it, scanned the pages, and felt an emptiness settle over her that was almost anticlimactic. It was done. The unraveling was complete. Hank, true to his word, had accepted the out-of-state transfer. It was a new chapter for him, a fresh start away from the wreckage of their marriage. But he hadn't abandoned the children. He agreed to a flexible co-parenting arrangement, ensuring that he would remain a strong, consistent presence in Caleb and Sarah's lives, flying back and forth, making sacrifices to see them. It was a testament to his dedication as a father, a dedication Molly had once so carelessly overlooked. The family home, the house filled with a decade and a half of memories, felt too heavy, too full of ghosts. Molly decided to sell it. It was a painful decision. Each box packed, each room emptied, a physical act of letting go, of severing ties. She needed a fresh start, a space untainted by the echoes of their past, a place where she could breathe again. She poured her energy, her grief, her regret, back into the bakery. She rebranded it, simplifying the name, refining the menu. It was a painstaking process, but in the methodical rhythm of kneading dough and decorating cakes, she found a renewed sense of purpose. Sweet surrender became Molly's oven, a testament to her own resilience, her own name on the door. It wasn't about Hank, or Dale, or anyone else. It was about her. Molly learned to live with the consequences. Some wounds, she realized, never fully heal. They simply scar over. A constant reminder of what was lost, what was broken, the guilt, the shame. Still pricked at her. But it no longer consumed her. She had a frank conversation with Brenda, laying bare the full extent of her emotional affair, her misplaced blame. Brenda, though initially quiet, eventually offered a tentative forgiveness, a lifeline in a sea of isolation. "I was angry, Molly," Brenda admitted, "but you're my friend. And you're hurting." It was enough. Molly found moments of joy with Caleb and Sarah. They bought a smaller house, still in the same school district, and she focused on rebuilding their sense of stability, creating new routines, new memories. She saw their smiles return, slowly, tentatively, and in those moments, she felt a glimmer of hope. She reflected on the subtle, insidious ways a single silly joke could unravel a life, how unaddressed pride, fear, and a desperate need for validation could twist perceptions, lead to painful assumptions, and ultimately destroy what was once precious. It wasn't one thing, she realized, but a slow erosion, a series of small, almost imperceptible choices, each a tiny crack in the foundation. Hank and Molly maintained a civil, if still bruised, relationship. For the children, they coordinated schedules, attended school events, even managed polite conversation. One day, they met for an awkward coffee at a neutral spot, just to touch base about Caleb's upcoming high school applications. They talked about the kids, their futures. There was no recrimination, no anger, just a silent acknowledgement of their shared history, the two paths that had diverged so dramatically. Molly looked to the future, accepting that perfect wasn't the goal anymore. Perfect was a dangerous illusion, a fragile facade. The goal now was honest, flawed living. It was about showing up, being present. Even when it was hard, she carried the indelible weight of her choices, but also the invaluable lessons learned about trust, about the vital importance of open communication, and, most critically, about her own self-worth. Needing no external validation, she found a measure of peace in the quiet strength of the Midwestern landscape, in the steady rhythm of the seasons, in the simple act of baking bread. The story of her life wasn't a grand resolution, but a quiet, ongoing navigation of the complexities reshaped by infidelity and its moral consequences. She was a stronger, sadder, and profoundly wiser woman. One day at a time, the realization had been a slow, creeping dawn. The perfect life was a fragile thing, easily shattered by a whisper of doubt, a casual remark, and the quiet erosion of trust. Molly had learned the hard way that silence, however well-intentioned, could be a corrosive force, creating voids that others might unwittingly fill. She had paid the price for her misjudgments, for the subtle dance with another man, for the pride that kept her from seeing her husband's struggles. Hank, too, carried his wounds, the sting of betrayal compounded by his own unspoken efforts. Their divorce wasn't a vindication for either of them, but a cold, factual end to a story written in misunderstanding and quiet, mounting resentments. The Midwestern landscape, with its vast, unyielding horizons, now seemed to mirror the expanse of their separation. Life had reshaped, imperfectly, irrevocably, leaving only the quiet strength to navigate the complicated, flawed reality that remained.